Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy Dela Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. So, Bibi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Good. Thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your journey and share your story. I was actually talking to a potential guest. What was it? I think yesterday or the day before. I had asked her to be, she's actually child of immigrants. So her parents came as refugees from Cuba. And so she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You sent me the questions and I, busy and hasn't been able. And she was like, but I've been really thinking, because she's a therapist. She was like, I've been really thinking about you talking to immigrants and their stories and things like that. And sometimes they have a lot of trauma involved and everything. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that's why, one, I send questions beforehand. And two, I just want to make sure that, the guests are comfortable sharing their immigration story, because I've had a lot of guests tell me, they've shared their stories before, but the immigration aspect of it, they haven't been asked or they haven't shared that part of it. So thank you for being here and being willing to share.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So if you can introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you do, and then we can get started on childhood growing up in Germany.
I'm 𝗕𝗶𝗯𝗶 LeBlanc. 𝗕𝗶 is a nickname my sister gave me many years ago, and it kind of stuck here because it's easier than to pronounce my German name, which is 𝗕𝗶𝗯𝗶. And it's like barbell, but with the umlaut, with the two dots on the A. So, and I grew up in Germany. I moved here in 1990, and I have a business, a boutique marketing company called Culture to Color, and we create explainer coloring books for businesses as marketing tools, businesses, destinations, organizations.
Awesome.
So,
that's cool. We'll get into your
I've done a lot of different things in my life, but this is what I'm doing right now.
So, okay. Yeah. And so growing up, how was it in Germany?
Well, I was born in the American sector of West Berlin. And when I tell people that, they're like, their eyes get big and they're like, what does that even mean? So I grew up in West Berlin during the Cold War. Oh. So yes, my city was enclosed by a wall, and it was like after World War II, the winning Allied forces had divided Germany into 4 zones of occupation. There was the American zone, the French zone, the British zone, and the Soviet zone. And Berlin was the capital, but it was like 110 miles inside the Soviet zone. But it was a capital, so that got also divided. And then when their political ideology started, going different directions, the Western Allied wanted to install democracy, but the Soviets wanted communism. Then eventually the city got split up, and the country got split up. So I grew up in the American sector of West Berlin. So we had all the freedoms that came with that. But growing up, I very acutely felt that wall surrounding the city. Like, we couldn't just drive out to the countryside because the wall was there, and it was guarded by sharpshooters and watchtowers, with guns. And there was a land strip behind the wall that had landmines in it, and it was patrolled by guard dogs. And so we couldn't just leave. Yeah. It wasn't as simple as, driving outside of the city into the countryside. And then also we had family in East Berlin. Now, we were able to go visit them every once in a while. It was a big to-do, a big process. We had to apply for a permit to go over there for the day and to go through one of their checkpoints. And going through those checkpoints was always scary because they would, if we came through with a car, they would take the car apart, basically. They had everybody get out. They'd lift up the back seat to see if we were smuggling anything underneath. Or they had this big, long, flexible rod they stuck in the gas tank to see if we were smuggling currency, And that this little mirror that they would put under the car to see if we were smuggling anything. And my dad, knowing my dad, he would always bring something over he wasn't supposed to. So that made it even more scary. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So that wasn't fun because you were only supposed to, like, you could bring groceries, like coffee or whipping cream or maybe jeans, but no printed materials, definitely not any currency because we had 2 different currencies.
Okay.
And one was much stronger and worth a lot more than the Soviet one. And or the East German one. So
the East was occupied by the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So when you guys were going over.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've always felt like we were under the watchful eye of the Stasi, the state security, Ministry of State Security. And we knew that the apartment my aunt and uncle lived in and my cousins was bugged by the Stasi. And so we could never freely talk in the apartment. Like when my parents wanted to talk, we would go for a walk down by the river, where we knew we wouldn't be overheard or the grown-ups wouldn't be overheard, and for us as kids, it was fun playing with the cousins, but there was always that, and because the Stasi was like, they had very strict rules, like a simple joke about the government or listening to American music, was reason enough to get arrested, for them to arrest you and incarcerate you, interrogate you, torture you if they wanted to, until you signed some sort of agreement confessing to whatever they thought you did. And then they turned you into spying on your friends and family or co-workers, and so that was, it was interesting times. I didn't like it back then growing up like that, I was glad I was in West Berlin, not East Berlin, but I didn't enjoy it. And my goal in life was, as soon as I could, leave Berlin and move to West Germany. And so.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. So,
I mean, from what I learned growing up, we've heard Germany, for some reason, well, not for some reason, but we associate it with the Holocaust, right? We know about the Holocaust and everything. And I've always heard about that great, the wall coming down. But it was never really explained, like how you're doing now, like what the significance of that was.
What it was like.
Yeah, what it was like. So thank you again for educating me and the audience and sharing that. So I know some people don't like to age themselves or to say anything, but do you remember like when the wall was down? Were you there or? Yeah.
So I was born in 1963. And so the wall had been built 2 years before then. They started building it in 1961 because so many people were leaving from the Soviet sector. And so I grew up with it. It was always there. It was part of my reality. I didn't know a different world. And I never really questioned it. It was just the way the world was, So I was not expecting it to ever see it come down in my lifetime, It was just what the world was like. So fast forward to 1989. I lived in Frankfurt at the time. So I left Berlin as soon as I finished high school. I had met a guy in West Germany and we started dating and I moved. But that's a different story. But anyway, I left Berlin. I was happy to do so. And so in 1989, I was a flight attendant for Lufthansa. And I came back from a flight, I think to Africa, and my mom called me. And I was living with some roommates in Frankfurt. And my mom called me and she says, the wall just came down. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was so not in the realm of possibilities, And she's like, the wall just came down, the checkpoint. Like, it chokes me up.
I am getting chills.
The checkpoints are open and we're like, oh my gosh, we've rented a car and started driving towards Berlin with my roommates. And on the Autobahn, we could see the East German cars. They had different cars. We could see them coming the opposite direction. And it was so unreal because we had never seen them in West Germany on the Autobahn. And so we got to the first checkpoint. Remember, you had to drive through East Germany to get to Berlin. So you get to the first checkpoint, drive a little bit, and then get to Berlin, go through a second checkpoint to be let into the West. We got to the first checkpoint on a dark, cold November night, and which on any normal day would have been deserted at that point. But there were cars parked left and right on the Autobahn. Like, you can't park there. Like on the freeway, you can't park, right?
Yeah.
And there were cars parked there and West Germans welcoming the East Germans through that checkpoint with thermos cans of hot tea and cocoa and whatnot. And there was like hugging and crying and dancing. And, you know, it was incredible. People were partying as the cars were coming through. And
wow.
It had taken some of the people, like from Berlin to that checkpoint, it's about a 2-hour drive. But it had taken these people like 16 hours because so many of them,
people
right?
were there.
And they were loaded to, like, they had as many people as they could fit into these little cars, these little cars, you know? And it was like this big party, and it was just incredible. It's like,
oh my gosh.
we became part of history in the making, you know? And so then later that night, we kept driving to Berlin and got there really late and connected with family and went straight to the Brandenburg Gate, which is a big monument in Berlin. It's a gate. And during the Cold War, it was no man's land. Neither side could go through. It was blocked off from both sides and nobody could access it. But on that night, we walked through, and that was really a big, big moment, you know?
Wow.
And
so you mentioning just how there were so many checkpoints to get from one side to the other and everything. So before we recorded, I told you that I'm listening to Think and Grow Rich. And we know that book was published in the 1930s. So there's a few things that are a little outdated. But one of the things that it mentioned in the book was like in the United States, you can go from state to state with no restrictions or anything like that. So this is coming from a very privileged place because I was born here, grew up here and everything. So I didn't really understand what that book was talking about until now. It just clicked because you coming from a whole different country, a whole different history and everything. Yeah. We don't have those checkpoints here. Like we can travel to Georgia, Alabama with no problem, no passport, no anything. So like now that you mentioned it, I was like, okay, that's what the book is talking about because
and before the EU, like if you traveled within Europe, there were always checkpoints. If you go from Germany to France or to Holland or to Switzerland, there are always checkpoints.
Yeah.
And now they're not. So,
now there's not. Yeah. Wow. So it was a whole thing right now. So what led you to come to the U.S.? Because you wanted to leave Berlin. So you were able, you mentioned a little bit that you were able to. So that
boyfriend that I mentioned that I met when I was 18 and had just finished high school, he wanted to take me to California on vacation. He had spent some time there and he wanted to take me there. And I'm like, nah, thank you, but I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And I had these prejudices that I think at the time, I don't know how it is now, you know, it's much later, but at the time, like I had ideas, all Americans are superficial and materialistic. I had no interest in coming here, you know, but eventually he talked me into it and we went to California for weeks and I absolutely fell in love with California. Like I loved it out there. Yeah. Southern California. And we had such a good time. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was how friendly people are and how easy to approach. Like you could just talk to any stranger on the street, you know, and strike up a conversation. In Germany, you don't do that. You still don't do that.
Oh, really?
Not typically. Every once in a while. I just had a situation recently, but not typically. People think I don't know. They're paranoid, I think.
Okay.
It's different.
So
it's a cultural difference.
Yeah, I was going to say, so was that like a cultural shock when you first came? Like just being able to approach people or?
Well, I wouldn't say a shock because a shock sounds like the whole term culture shock. It has like this negative connotation, right? I think it was, if anything, it was a positive cultural shock. You know, I was pleasantly surprised and I really loved it. And after that vacation, I was like, I want to live here someday, you know?
Okay.
And growing up, I always had this idea in the back of my head. I wanted to live in a place where they're close to the ocean and where palm trees grow. And I had no idea where that came from, but look where I ended up in Florida, you know?
Florida, yeah. You mentioning that Germans are kind of like, you know, you don't approach or standoffish. It reminds me of like New York, because a lot of people, you know, like they're not really friendly.
But it's worse in Germany.
Oh, it is? Oh, my goodness.
The customer service, oh my gosh. Like you go to a restaurant, you know, here the customer is king. There, the waiters and waitresses are the kings, you know, and they
maybe it has to do with the tipping culture though that we have here.
That is very different there. Yes.
Yeah. Because here it's just different.
People are just friendlier here.
Yeah, okay. And, cool. Yeah, that's nice. I don't know. Do you know the comedian Trevor Noah? No, he is a comedian from South Africa.
Okay.
And he has this, I can't remember what his Netflix special is, but he has a stand-up special, and he was talking about going to Paris and how unfriendly they were there. So that's what came to mind. He was like, their customer service, like when you come to like, you know, try on some clothes, like he's like, they tear your self-esteem down. And obviously he's making a joke about it, but like that's what comes to mind because you mentioned the
No, I went into a grocery store one time when I was visiting, asking, you know, we have these Christmas calendars where you open a little door and there's a piece of chocolate behind it. You know, I think they're becoming more known here now too. And so, but I was in Berlin, and I went into a grocery store and said, where can I find these Christmas calendars? And she looks at me, she's like, how would I know? I'm beyond that age. You know, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. So when you first moved to the United States, did you first move to California, or what state did you first move to?
Well, I came in 86. I went to California as an au pair.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was my first longer exposure to living here. And I spent 8 months in California and loved it. Yeah. I had applied with the airlines. I had done an apprenticeship with a British pharmaceutical company, learning business administration type stuff. The educational system is a little different in Germany than it is here. There are a lot of jobs you learn on the job rather than at school and then go work at a company. So it's training in a company. So I did that, but I wanted to travel more. So I applied with Lufthansa to become a flight attendant, and they interviewed me and they said, you need to improve your English. So at that point, I had made a connection somehow magically with a guy that knew of a family in California in the Bay Area that was looking for an au pair. So when they said, you need to improve your English, I'm like, great, I'm out of here. And so I went to California, connected with some people I had met on that first vacation there. And then spent 6 months with a family in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is now Silicon Valley. And so, spent 6 months there, learned a lot of English there just from like watching TV and just living there. You know, that whole idea of learning a language by immersion. Yeah. So, and that was a great time. Did my first personal growth type seminar that somebody introduced me to, and that was really that really had an impact. Like the whole, what I got from that for myself was like, my life isn't just destiny. Like I can shape my life. I can pick my path, you know, and that was really an instrumental piece of information that nobody has ever told me before, you know. And I also made my first skydive during that time. And that would later lead to a whole lot of other things. So that was my first time living in the U.S. for a longer time.
An au pair. So you were 8 months, you said? Yeah. Okay.
So and then I went back to Germany and applied for the airlines and got hired. And then I flew with them for 4 years. And making my first skydive was great, but I wanted to do more. So when I had my first vacation, I went back to California and learned how to skydive on my own, you know?
Oh my goodness.
And then I became the skydiving flight attendant. I took my parachute everywhere and jumped all over the world. It was, it was really cool.
Where was your favorite place to do that?
The one jump that sticks out was in Hawaii, and we talked about Hawaii a little earlier. And it was my 50th jump, and I showed up at this drop zone. They had some event going on there for a few days, and I showed up there, and this guy comes up to me and says, you know, you're new here, you know, you're a new skydiver, you want to go up and just do one big 10-way star, like 10 people in a circle. And we went up to altitude and jumped out and just... You know, for me, it was like, here was this little girl from West Berlin, you know, that so longed to travel and see the world. Yeah. You know, flying, free falling at 120 miles over Hawaii, seeing the beautiful coastline. Wow. And 10 new friends, you know, in free fall. And that was probably one of my favorite memories that really kind of stuck with me. And then later that guy, we were back on the ground. He turns out he was a world champion skydiver. And he says, if you're serious about skydiving, you need to come to Dela in Florida. Yes. Yeah. Because it's considered the skydiving capital of the world.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Wow. There are teams from all over the world coming to train here in the winter.
Wow.
And so it was a big deal.
A lot today.
Oh, good.
I had no idea. That's so cool. So how long did you do the skydiving?
So on the next vacation, I went to Florida with a flight attendant friend of mine and met my husband during that vacation. We were going to stay 10 days in Zephyr Hills, Florida, of all places.
Yeah.
They had an event going there, some course or something, and we wanted to do that. And they were jumping out of DC-3s and doing formations, and we were going to stay 10 days, and then we had tickets to go to the Galapagos Islands. Well, we never made it. We stayed 4 weeks in Zephyr Hills. I made 80 jumps in that time. And 2 days before I left, I met my husband. And, then we started long-distance dating, and for about a little over a year, and he proposed to me in Brazil.
Oh,
wow. Yes, in Rio. And so, and then...
Is he American?
Yeah.
He's American. Oh.
He's American, and so that was in 88 that I met him, and then early 1990, we got married, and I quit flying. I flew for about 4 years.
4 years.
With the airlines, and then moved over here.
Hi, Heidi here. Thank you so much for listening and supporting my podcast, but most importantly, the mission. If you would like to further support this podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. You can sign up for the newsletter. You'll receive the episodes straight to your inbox every time they drop. The link is in the show notes and the show description. You can subscribe to the podcast YouTube channel. And lastly, you can donate money. That link is also in the show notes and show description. If you would like to sponsor an episode or promote your business on this show, send me an email at Heidy@HeidyDelaCruz.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the episode. You guys settled here in Florida?
Yes. He was living in Miami at the time, and we lived there for a year. So he runs a place that builds parachutes, actually. And so I started working with him after I got all my paperwork and stuff, immigration paperwork sorted out. And
okay.
So I started working in the business, and we traveled a lot together to different skydiving events and stuff. That was a lot of fun. And then eventually the business got moved him up to DeLand because they were building a facility there.
Okay.
And they wanted him to run it from up there. Okay. And so we moved to DeLand, which is, I like it. It was a great place, or is a great place to raise kids. I'm glad I didn't have to raise mine in Miami. So it's a great, little college town.
It is,
that has a lot to offer for a family.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're in Florida, married, you got everything situated, and so what are you? So you're done with the airline. So what are you doing now in the business? How long did you guys do that?
So, well, he's still doing it.
Oh, he's still doing it.
We're now exes, but he's still doing that. Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. And so I was doing marketing and some of the logistics, like the production, like the order in which the orders would go through production, that kind of stuff. Okay. And sometimes I would cut out the pieces for parachutes with hot knives on these big glass tables, and before they had the laser tables. So, we worked together, traveled a lot together, and then we had our first son in 94. He's turning 30 this year. And I homeschooled all of the boys, and there was you were talking about culture shock. There was a really awakening kind of a moment. So I was mostly involved in the skydiving world and people coming from all over the world. And so now I had a baby, and so your circle of friends changes, and I started meeting more, other moms with small children and stuff. And what really struck me that a lot of times the first question was, what church do you go to?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, homeschool, right? Because you were with homeschool mom? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And so, that took some getting used to, because Germans are not, other than southern Germany, they're more religious.
Okay.
But the rest of Germany is really not very religious. And I was raised a Christian, I guess I would say, but not really. We didn't go to church every Sunday and none of that, Yeah. And so that took some getting used to, that question.
Ask
and
what church you go to.
Gotcha. So that was interesting. Okay. Yeah.
And so how many boys do you have?
3.
And you homeschooled all 3?
Yeah.
Wow. How was that?
It was really good.
Okay.
I think it wasn't like there's many different ways to homeschool, you know, and there's the strict, like doing school at home from 8 to 9, we do math, from 9 to 10, we do English, that kind of a thing. And you use a strict curriculum. And then there's the complete opposite direction that a lot of people call unschooling, I guess, where you just live life and follow what they're interested in and cater to that. And so we were more on that side of the spectrum a lot of times. I tried the whole curriculum thing, and it was very difficult with the boys. They didn't like it, and they were always fighting me. And so we just, lived life and did a lot of like activities and field trips, and we traveled a lot with them. Like I took them to Germany pretty much every year, and we visited California every year, once or twice, to see family. My ex-husband's family is from Southern California. And then I wanted them to learn Spanish, so I started taking them to Costa Rica on a regular basis for a few years. Yeah, and that was really incredible. And so they learned some Spanish there. I don't know how much really stuck, but it was like we lived with a family. It was immersion. We lived with a family.
Okay.
And there were lots of kids around, and they would play soccer barefoot in the grass field. It was a tiny village, and they would play with the kids, and they'd go to their houses and like play marbles. And some of them had dirt floors in their houses, so it was really a good experience for them to be exposed to those kinds of things.
And so then, you guys, like, how long would you guys stay there? Like
anywhere between 2 weeks and I think 6 weeks. A couple of times, and then they would go to a little place there that we had signed up with that was a language school / wild animal rescue center / volunteer center. So they hadn't had young kids like that. My youngest one, I think, was 4 at the time. So they kind of tailored the program to them, because you can't expect kids to sit in the classroom from 8 to 12 learning a language, right? So they would go feed the animals, and like it was more of a natural
learning
approach.
While doing things.
Exactly, and doing crafts.
So does Germany have like that choice with school, like how we have here? No,
very strict.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's like just
there's no homeschooling there.
Okay.
As far as I know, not back then when we were doing it. Maybe but it's very difficult.
Very difficult. Okay.
Yeah, you have to send your kids to school.
Yeah.
And in fact, they can stop you at the airport if you're traveling outside of vacation time with your child. They can stop you at the airport. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Learning a lot. Oh my goodness.
So it's one of the few countries. I think most other countries, it's allowed to. You're allowed to homeschool your kids.
And how's the university over there versus here?
It's free for one thing.
Okay.
And so that's a really good thing. And so we have 3 different types of high schools.
Okay.
So one you can, and I'm not sure I'm up to date on this stuff.
Okay.
So, but when I've left there, it was you could finish after 9th grade or 10th grade.
Okay.
Then the middle one you could finish after 10th grade, and the other ones after 13th. You go to school for 13 years, and then you can go to university.
Okay.
The other 2 you become an apprentice, I guess is the closest that would come to that. And you work with a company and go learn the job, the work on the job, the job at work. Yeah. And so then you work maybe for a few weeks, and then you go to school for a few weeks, and, or sometimes you go to school once a week and work the other days, stuff like that. And you get paid not a lot, but a little bit of money. And so I finished high school after 13 years, and I could have studied, but a lot of degrees had an NC, a numerus clausus, where you had to have a very high grade average to get in there, or you'd have to wait for a few years. And I had no idea what I wanted to do or study at that time. And so I went into the apprenticeship program anyway.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like I missed out on the whole college life,
experience.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have a very interesting life. So I don't think
you miss even without college, right?
I don't think you miss anything in college. But how do you feel that like homeschooling your sons and just like the path that you guys took? Because it's not Like, I mean, you went to Costa Rica and traveled and everything. Like, how do you feel like that really shaped them into who they are today?
I'm sure it shaped them. They're all doing okay. They, you know, they both, my two oldest one, both have their pilot's licenses, and that's one of the harder tests you can take. You know, I was just talking to my son about that today because he's working on his next license. And so...
You guys have a thing for airplanes.
My ex-husband does, actually. He was always into flying and, you know, with a skydiving background and all of that. He designed a lot of parachutes and... Yeah.
That's
He's
so
always
cool.
been into flying since he was little. Like, he was building model airplanes, and he did that a lot with the kids and took them to competitions. And
So I love asking the guests about their first time going back home, if they had the opportunity to go back home. But you mentioned, like, it was right after you finished the au pair, the 8 months, you were able to go back to Germany, correct?
Yeah, I went back and worked for the airlines for 4 years.
So how was that going back? Was there anything different, or was it just like, you know, because it had only been 8 months? So,
well, it was different in that, like, now I really wanted to live in the States. So after that experience, but it wasn't that easy, you know, unless you get married or, you know, find a company that will sponsor you to work here. And so I went to a Lufthansa office I think it was in New York, and asked them, you know, can you transfer me through the company? And they're like, no. Can't do that.
So for people who did not hear, it's not that easy to come to the United States.
It's not that easy, no. And I just got lucky, you know, meeting John when I did. And that was apparently meant to be, so.
Gotcha. So how did you get into now what you're currently doing with the coloring books?
So I have family in Southern California, and my sister-in-law works in a gallery in Southern California in the small town. And she says, I've always loved taking photos. I got a camera when I was young, and always, you know, all my travels, I took a lot of photos. And she said to me, if you ever want to exhibit some of your photography, you can do that here in our gallery. And I'm like, great. Yeah. And so I exhibited some of the photos there, and I went to visit, and I saw a coloring book that a local photographer there had done, an adult coloring book that he had taken some of his photos of the local sites in that little town and had turned them into coloring pages with these Zentangle patterns and stuff. And I'm like, this is really cool. I would love to do that for DeLand, you know, because at that point I had lived there almost 30 years, and that was 2018. And so I went home and just jumped right into it. Like, when I want to do something, I tend to not think about it too much, but just start doing it, you know? Yeah. And so I did a book about DeLand, but I wanted people to have, it was an adult coloring book of some of the local sites and businesses like Skydive DeLand, or they have this reptile discovery center there, which is really cool. And I wanted people to have some information, like know what they're coloring. So I wrote, you know, 3 or 4 lines of text of what it is they're coloring, so they would know, and, you know, the title, the name of the place. And I wanted to make sure everyone was okay with being in the book, so I asked them, you know, and so then we started talking, and I got to hear their stories and what made them do what they do, you know, like the snake people at the Reptile Discovery Center. And that was so much fun and so interesting that I just kind of kept going. After I published that in 2018, I did one on New Smyrna and then Mount Dora. And then it was 2019, and I always had in the back of my mind, I wanted to do a book about Berlin, where I came from, right? Now, Berlin is such a big thing. You could do volumes about the history of Berlin or the sites or something, because, you know, there's so much history there. And so I decided to focus on Berlin during the Cold War, because that's what I knew. And I had signed up that year, too, for a speaking event in Daytona, Elevate Daytona. Are you familiar with that? It's a TED-style talk, but it's only 5 minutes long, and you have to have slides that progress every 15 seconds. So you really have to stay on task, you know? And so I had signed up for that because I wanted to get over my fear of public speaking, you know? And I'm like, 5 minutes, I almost cursed. I can do that. I can do that. 5 minutes, I can do it. I got to pick my topic. And since that was the year of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the wall, I decided to talk about that and what it was like, kind of like what I just told you, what it was like to grow up there. And then I did that. It was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, scarier than skydiving. And I did that, and then was able to use that script for the introduction of the Berlin book. So telling that story. So yeah, that worked out, you know. So I published Berlin, and that was the first one that was bilingual and English and German, and the first one that made it to #1 on Amazon, and also the first one that won a book award.
Oh, nice.
And yes. And so then I did a book about Tuscany with a friend who she teaches people how to do sponsored travel. And so she arranged this whole trip to Tuscany, and we got all these amazing sponsorships, you know, wine tasting and cooking classes and Vespa driving and balloon flying, all this stuff, and did a coloring book and featuring some of the businesses that we got the sponsorships from, you know, in the coloring book. And that was written in English and Italian. And so that was that. And then COVID came. And at this point, I had realized that making books and selling them and making money at it is very difficult, because you sell a book on Amazon, you sell it for $15, you get maybe $1 or $2 at the most. So unless you sell millions, very difficult way to make money.
Yeah.
So then COVID came, and I wanted to do something. Like, I had a friend who told me how difficult it was for the people in the retirement homes and in the nursing homes and stuff, you know? And I'm like, is there anything I can do? Can I come volunteer? Of course, you couldn't back then, right? Yeah. And she says they're so living in fear because they are so isolated. The TV's running all day, blaring the you know,
horrible,
all this, how horrible everything is. And so I had the idea of creating little packages with coloring pages, and, you know, a little message and a pack of pencils or markers, and donating them to some local retirement homes, nursing homes, hospitals and stuff. And that was really nice, I think. They liked it. And one nurse asked me, do you have anything specifically for kids? I'm like, I don't, but I can come up with something. Yeah. And so I had a designer draw me up a couple of 5 animal pages, Florida animals. And they were so cute that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do more with this designer. And that then turned into a book called Endangered Animals of North America. And it's written in English and Spanish. And I started with Florida, but then I said, well, maybe I'll make it Animals of the US. And then it turned into North America, because then you have a wider audience, you know? And so I had people and some friends and local businesses sponsor the animals. So the cost of producing the book was covered. Wow. So I didn't have any out-of-pocket expenses after that. So that was a first, you know, moving into a more commercial direction, trying to make it work as a business. And so that book won 4 book awards, actually. It did really well. But again, the sales, it's very different. I was thinking all the zoos and aquariums and natural history museums, but it's very difficult to break into there.
Okay.
So, but it's a beautiful book. And so I started getting more involved with local chambers and, you know, talking with business people and stuff. And I made a connection in San Francisco, Chinatown, with a lady who runs a nonprofit organization, still during COVID. And she hired me, or that foundation hired me, to do a book about San Francisco, Chinatown. And they paid me for it up front. And I'm like, this is a much better business model, doing coloring books for businesses who want it and who will pay me for the services, you know. And they did it because they wanted to bring more positive publicity to Chinatown.
Especially at that time, yes.
Yeah, especially at that time, exactly. So that was the first time I did it for somebody, you know. And that was a really great experience. I met so many incredible people in that community. You know, I've become friends with some of them, and so interesting. That's the first time when I thought I should have a podcast. I could interview all these amazing people, you know. Yeah. There's a group of dancers. They're all in their 70s and 80s, and they tour the world dancing, all dressed up in their Chinese costumes, and incredible what they do. And I could go on and on. Lots of stories.
Ahead.
So, and that book did really good too with the book awards. It won 4 book awards. And yeah, that was that was great. And then I started focusing more. Then I'm like, we have to pivot. This is what we're going to do. We're going to target businesses, organizations, destinations, and market to them for them to use it as marketing tools. And that's how I got into that. Very long story. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I love that. This is a whole journey in itself. Like you start one
really
way
is.
and then you try another and then you get other opportunities and then, you know, like you said, sometimes you have to pivot and change
and see where doors open, you know, and what works and what doesn't work. And
so now businesses use the coloring books for marketing.
Yes, like for example, we have this book about home buying made easy, and any real estate professionals, real estate agents or lenders or title agents can use it. We custom brand it on the cover.
Okay.
And then throughout the book also. And it basically walks their customers through the process of buying a home, you know, finding a realtor, finding a lender, house shopping, house hunting, and they can use it. And it's so much more engaging than any brochure or another pen or another mug or,
that
you know.
ends up, you know.
Yeah, right. This is something that'll be around and they'll share it with other people. It has a much wider reach than your traditional marketing tools. Yeah. So this basically is a template book. We just customize it towards the customer, with the branding. And so then we have pick and choose models like this one, for example, about Volusia County. We have like 30 or 35 images that people can pick and choose from. They pick 8 or 12 and we put it together in a book.
Okay.
And then we've had businesses like we have a restaurant in Dela, De La Vega. They have...
Oh, I love them.
Yeah, me too. My favorite place in Dela.
Oh my God, we should go together.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, good. They use it as their kids menu. They put the kids menu in the center of the book. Yeah. And then they also have a QR code to a recipe where Chef Nora cooks with her 2 daughters.
Oh, wow.
Makes a recipe on a video, you know? And so you can, any kind of business can. I've had a realtor use these images, and so pick and choose model.
That's awesome.
And then we have custom ones where this lady wanted to do a book about hair.
Yes.
And
very important.
Right?
Very
yes, it's so
topic.
personal
and it's
to
educational.
us. Yes, right. Yes. It gives you, that's what I want. I want it to be educational. It gives you real information that's usable, you know? Mm-hmm. And so all different kinds. And then the latest one is a passion project that I just did. It's a history about the Berlin airlift. And so that's a whole big story in and of itself. And I've done a lot with this lately. And tells a story of, you know, the Soviets cutting off Berlin. This was before the wall was built. This happened in 48 and 49, and the Soviets cut off access to West Berlin, which the West Berliners relied on the roads and the waterways and the trains to bring supplies into the city. And because of their political differences, you know, the Russians said, we're just going to close everything and, you know, until you give up Berlin, because they wanted Berlin, and they would have kept going because the boots on the ground of the Soviets far outnumbered the Western Allies. Yeah, so then the Western Allies decided to supply Berlin by air because there were 3 air corridors, and it was contractually negotiated and signed by all parties that they would have access to these air corridors. And so they started supplying Berlin by air with airplanes, and they had airplanes landing and taking off every 3 minutes, 24/7. Wow. For almost a year. Supplying a city of over 2 million people. It gives me goosebumps.
Wow.
Yeah. And the effort of that, and it's just such an incredible story.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So much history.
So much history, yes.
Wow.
And now in studying this past year, in, you know, doing the research for the book, I realized that growing up with a wall was the lesser of 2 evils. Because if the Western Allies hadn't fought for Berlin, the Russians would have taken over, and they would have grown up under the Soviets.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have stopped with Berlin. It would have been West Germany and probably Western Europe. So that was a really, really pivotal chapter in history.
Wow.
So, yes. So I've been doing presentations about that in different places, and I want to do more public speaking and
Yeah.
with that, because I think we can learn so much from that. We're so divided on so many topics these days, you know, and this story shows what we can accomplish if we communicate and collaborate together on common goals, you know.
Yes, I love that. And one of the reasons why I started this is because so many incredible stories like yours, like you just have had such an incredible life. And I'm learning so much. I've learned so much from different people. And it's just amazing to what you can learn, what people have gone through. Yeah. You know, like you grew up, like that wall was everything. Like there was no you knowing without the wall. So like even when your mom told you the wall, you're kind of like, what? Yeah. You know, like I completely understand that, because it was like, you know, your brain had to process it a little bit. It was like, wait, what? Yeah. And just connecting everything. And with this podcast, I learned what an au pair was. Like I had no idea what that was until I interviewed my first guest, who actually came to the United States through the au pair. So when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, you also. So I love this. I love learning. I love listening to other people's stories, and we can learn so much from other people's stories.
And everybody has a story.
Yes.
If you're just willing to ask some question and listen, you know? And,
exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And that's what I love about doing the coloring books, because I learn so much from people and why they do what they do, and, you know.
Did it ever cross your mind to like do a publishing company or no?
Yes, but I don't know that I really want to go into that. You know, it's better to just focus on something. And this is a real niche market, which is a great opportunity, but also a challenge, because nobody's heard of this.
I know. When we first met and you first told me that, I was like, coloring books, what?
Yeah, and people, until you show them, you know, then like the light bulb goes on. But until you show them, it's like, they like, what?
Yeah. So if someone is interested in a coloring book, how can they connect with you?
Go to my website, culture2color.com, and I don't know if you can put that on there somewhere. Yes. And I'm happy to supply contact information. Yep.
I will include your link in the show note, in the show description. And once again, thank you so much for this.
Oh, thank you. This is great. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.